Have you ever trusted someone so completely that when they betrayed you, it didn't just break your heart, it shattered your entire world? What if I told you that sometimes, the most devastating revenge comes not from anger, but from the cold, calculated precision of someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose? This is the story of Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old marketing coordinator who thought she had found her dream job at Pinnacle Digital Solutions. A story that begins with inappropriate text messages and ends with a boardroom revelation so explosive, it would destroy everything her boss had built over 15 years. But what happened in that conference room wasn't just revenge, it was something far more sinister, something that would leave everyone questioning who the real monster was. Sarah's story starts like so many others in corporate America. Fresh out of her master's program, drowning in student debt, living in a cramped studio apartment where the walls were so thin she could hear her neighbors' every conversation. She had been job hunting for 8 months, surviving on instant ramen and the occasional freelance gig that barely covered her rent. When the call came from Pinnacle Digital Solutions, Sarah was folding laundry on her bed, staring at yet another rejection email. The voice on the other end was warm, professional. Marcus Kellerman, the company's vice president of marketing, wanted to interview her for a position that seemed too good to be true. The salary was double what she had been hoping for. The benefits package included health insurance, dental, and a retirement plan. Most importantly, it was her chance to finally prove herself in the marketing world. The interview went flawlessly. Marcus was charming, attentive, asking all the right questions about her vision for digital marketing strategies. He was in his early 40s, married with 2 children whose photos sat proudly on his mahogany. She threw herself into every project, staying late to perfect presentations, volunteering for extra assignments. Marcus took notice of her dedication, often praising her work in team meetings. He became a mentor figure, someone who seemed genuinely invested in her career growth. Sarah began to see him as the father figure she had never had. Her own dad had abandoned their family when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. Marcus would stop by her desk to chat about projects, sometimes bringing her coffee from the expensive cafe down the street. He remembered details about her life, her love for vintage books, her dream of traveling to Japan, her struggles with her mother's recent cancer diagnosis. These small gestures made Sarah feel valued, appreciated in a way she had never experienced in her previous jobs. But something shifted in month 4. It started subtly, so gradually that Sarah almost didn't notice at first. Marcus began texting her about work matters after hours. Initially, these messages were professional questions about project timelines, requests for reports. Sarah responded dutifully, grateful that her boss trusted her enough to handle important matters outside of office hours. The messages slowly became more frequent, more personal. Marcus started sharing details about his marriage troubles, how his wife didn't understand his dedication to work, how lonely he felt despite being surrounded by people. Sarah, naturally empathetic and still viewing him as a mentor, offered supportive responses. She told herself she was just being a good employee, a friend to someone who had been so kind to her. By month 6, the texts were arriving daily. Marcus would send them during lunch breaks, late at night, early in the morning. They contained increasingly inappropriate content, compliments about her appearance, suggestions that she was different from other women, hints that he was developing feelings beyond professional respect. Sarah's stomach would churn every time her phone buzzed with his name on the screen, but she didn't know how to respond. This man controlled her career, her financial stability, her future. Before I reveal what happened when Sarah finally decided to take action, make sure to subscribe and like this video so you don't miss the shocking twist that's coming. Trust me, you've never heard a workplace revenge story like this one. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Sarah was at her desk, finishing up a presentation for a major client meeting the next day, when her phone buzzed. The message from Marcus made her blood run cold. "Working late again? You're so dedicated. I wish my wife had half your passion. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like if things were different between us. If you weren't my employee. If I weren't married. Do you ever think about that, Sarah?" She stared at the message for 10 minutes, her hands trembling. This had crossed every line of professional behavior. This wasn't mentorship or friendship, this was sexual harassment from a man in a position of power. But what could she do? Report it to HR? The head of HR was Marcus's golf buddy. Go to his superior? Marcus was beloved in the company, known for his charm and his ability to bring in major clients. Who would believe her word against his? Sarah made a decision that night that would change everything. Instead of responding to the message, she began documenting. She took screenshots of every inappropriate text, organized them by date and time, created a comprehensive file of evidence. She researched her company's sexual harassment policies, studied employment law, prepared herself for a battle she never wanted to fight. But Marcus wasn't finished. Over the next 3 weeks, his behavior escalated dramatically. The texts became more explicit, more demanding. He started showing up at her apartment building, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. He began scheduling unnecessary one-on-one meetings in his office, during which he would stand uncomfortably close, make inappropriate comments about her clothing, suggest that her career advancement might depend on her flexibility regarding their relationship. Sarah's performance at work began to suffer. She couldn't concentrate, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. She lost 15 pounds in a month. Dark circles formed under her eyes. Her mother, already weakened by chemotherapy, noticed the change during their weekly phone calls and begged Sarah to tell her what was wrong. But how could she explain that the job that was supposed to save their family financially was slowly destroying her mentally? The final straw came during the company Christmas party. Marcus had been drinking heavily, and as the evening progressed, his behavior became increasingly bold. He cornered Sarah by the bar, his breath reeking of whiskey, his hand sliding down her back as he whispered in her ear, "You know what I want from you, Sarah. Stop pretending you don't feel it too. Meet me in my office after everyone leaves. It's time we stopped playing games." Sarah excused herself and locked herself in the bathroom, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. She looked at herself in the mirror, pale, terrified, trapped. In that moment, she realized that Marcus had systematically isolated her, made her dependent on his approval, groomed her for this moment when he would demand payment for all his kindness. That night, Sarah made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. She wasn't going to quit. She wasn't going to transfer departments. She wasn't going to let this man destroy her career and her life. She was going to fight back, but not in the way anyone would expect. Sarah spent her weekend researching corporate policies, employment law, and most importantly, the personal and professional history of Marcus Kellerman. What she discovered would become the foundation for the most devastating workplace revenge in company history. She learned that Marcus had been accused of similar behavior twice before, once at his previous company, and once early in his tenure at Pinnacle. Both times, the women had quietly resigned after receiving settlement payments and signing non-disclosure agreements. Marcus had a pattern, a carefully orchestrated system of predatory behavior that he had perfected over years. But Sarah also discovered something else, something that made her blood run cold. Marcus wasn't just harassing female employees, he was embezzling company funds. Hidden in the expense reports she had access to as his marketing coordinator were irregularities that painted a picture of systematic theft. Fake client dinners, inflated travel expenses, fictitious conference fees that went directly into accounts linked to Marcus's personal business ventures. The harassment was just the surface. Marcus Kellerman was a criminal who had been using his position of trust to steal from the company while simultaneously preying on vulnerable female employees. Sarah realized she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every woman who had been silenced before her, and every woman who might become his victim in the future. Over the Christmas holidays, while Marcus was presumably enjoying time with the family he claimed to love so little, Sarah built her case. She cross-referenced expense reports with client meetings, traced financial transactions, documented every instance of inappropriate behavior. She created a presentation that would expose not just the harassment, but the theft, the pattern of abuse, the systematic corruption that Marcus had hidden behind his charming facade. But Sarah's plan wasn't simply to report Marcus to HR or to his superiors. She had learned enough about corporate culture to know that companies often protect their high-performing executives, even when faced with evidence of wrongdoing. Settlements and non-disclosure agreements were cheaper than scandals. Victims were expendable, profitable executives were not. No, Sarah had a different plan entirely. A plan that would ensure Marcus could never hurt another woman, never steal another dollar, never use his position of power to destroy someone's life again. But what she was planning would require perfect timing, nerves of steel, and a willingness to risk everything she had worked for. January brought new challenges as Marcus ramped up his harassment campaign. His texts became more threatening, more explicit about what he expected from Sarah. He began making veiled threats about her job performance, suggesting that her recent distraction might impact her upcoming performance review. He scheduled daily one-on-one meetings that felt more like psychological torture sessions than professional discussions. Sarah endured it all while secretly building her evidence file and perfecting her plan. She documented every interaction, recorded phone calls, saved voicemails. She was building a case so airtight that even the most expensive corporate lawyers wouldn't be able to poke holes in it. The plan required her to endure weeks of psychological torture, to let Marcus believe he was winning, to appear increasingly desperate and compliant. It was the most difficult acting performance of her life, pretending to be the broken, submissive victim Marcus wanted while secretly preparing for war. February 14, Valentine's Day, Marcus sent Sarah a text that would become the centerpiece of her presentation. "I've booked us a hotel room for tonight. Enough games, Sarah. Your career depends on this. Don't disappoint me." That message was the final piece of evidence Sarah needed. But instead of meeting Marcus at the hotel, she spent Valentine's night putting the finishing touches on what she called her nuclear option, a presentation that would detonate Marcus's life in front of everyone he had ever manipulated, stolen from, or betrayed. The company's quarterly all-hands meeting was scheduled for February 28. Every employee, every department head, every executive would be in attendance, including the CEO, the board of directors, and several major clients who had been invited to discuss future partnerships. It was the most important meeting of the fiscal year, and Marcus was scheduled to present the marketing department's achievements and future strategy. Sarah volunteered to help Marcus prepare his presentation, offering to handle the technical aspects, set up the slides, manage the equipment. Marcus, still believing he had broken her spirit, agreed. He had no idea that Sarah was inserting additional slides into his presentation, slides that would reveal everything. If you're still here, you're different from the rest. Hit subscribe and like, because this story is about to explode in ways you never imagined. The morning of February 28 arrived grey and cold, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared for what she knew would be either the most triumphant or most disastrous day of her career. She dressed carefully, professional but confident, the armor of someone ready for battle. Her hands were steady as she applied her makeup, but her heart hammered against her ribs with each passing minute. Sarah arrived at the office early to set up the presentation equipment in the main conference room. The space was imposing, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment that would ensure every person in the room could clearly see and hear what was about to unfold. As employees began filing in for the 9 a.m. meeting, Sarah took her seat in the back corner, laptop open, ready to control the presentation remotely. She watched Marcus work the room with his characteristic charm, shaking hands with board members, laughing with department heads, playing the role of the successful executive he had convinced everyone he was. CEO Patricia Williamson called the meeting to order, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had built pinnacle digital solutions from a small startup into a multi-million-dollar corporation. She introduced the agenda, highlighted the importance of the quarterly review, and turned the floor over to Marcus for the marketing presentation. Marcus stepped to the front of the room, confident and relaxed, clicking to his first slide. For the first 15 minutes, everything proceeded normally. He discussed campaign performance, client acquisition rates, revenue growth. The audience was engaged, nodding approvingly at the impressive statistics Marcus presented. But then Sarah's finger hovered over her laptop trackpad, ready to advance to the slides Marcus didn't know were coming. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. This was the point of no return. Once she clicked, there would be no going back, no pretending this was all a misunderstanding, No walking away quietly with a settlement and an NDA. Marcus clicked for his next slide, expecting to see his Q2 projections. Instead, the screen filled with a text message conversation, his phone number clearly visible at the top, dated just 2 weeks earlier. The message read, "Working late again? You're so dedicated. I wish my wife had half your passion. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like if things were different between us." The room fell into stunned silence. Marcus's face went white, then red, then white again. He fumbled with his clicker, desperately trying to advance the slide, but Sarah had locked him out of the presentation controls. He was trapped at the front of the room with nowhere to hide as his own words condemned him. This isn't, there's been some kind of technical error," Marcus stammered, but his voice was barely audible over the murmur of shocked conversations breaking out around the table. Sarah advanced to the next slide. Another text message, more explicit this time, "Meet me in my office after everyone leaves. It's time we stopped playing games." Then another, "Your career depends on this. Don't disappoint me." Board members were leaning forward in their chairs, their faces reflecting a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Patricia Williamson's jaw was set in a hard line, her eyes fixed on Marcus with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. But the text messages were just the beginning. Sarah clicked to the next section of her presentation, a comprehensive analysis of Marcus's expense reports over the past 3 years. She had color-coded the fraudulent entries, fake client dinners in red, inflated travel expenses in blue, fictitious conference fees in green. The pattern was undeniable, the evidence overwhelming. The slide showed that Marcus had stolen over $300,000 from the company through expense fraud alone. But there was more. Sarah had discovered that Marcus had been billing personal expenses to client accounts, charging the company for vacations he took with his family, even purchasing expensive gifts for his wife using corporate credit cards. Marcus was no longer trying to speak. He stood frozen at the front of the room, his face a mask of horror as his crimes were laid bare for everyone to see. Several board members were taking notes, others were already reaching for their phones, presumably calling their lawyers. But Sarah wasn't finished. The next slide contained information that no one in the room was expecting, not even Sarah herself, until she had dug deeper into Marcus's background during her investigation. Marcus Kellerman wasn't just a harasser and a thief. He was a man living under a false identity. The slide showed 2 driver's licenses side by side. One was Marcus Kellerman's current Pennsylvania license. The other was a Nevada license from 8 years earlier, issued to Michael Kovac, the same man, but with a different name. Sarah had discovered that Marcus had legally changed his identity after fleeing Nevada to avoid prosecution for embezzlement at his previous company. The room erupted in chaos. Board members were shouting questions, employees were gasping and whispering to each other, and Patricia Williamson was pounding her gavel demanding order. Through it all, Marcus stood motionless, his career, his reputation, his carefully constructed life crumbling around him in real time. But Sarah had saved the most devastating revelation for last. The final slide contained a single photograph, Marcus at a restaurant with a young woman who wasn't his wife. They were holding hands across the table, clearly intimate. The date stamp showed it was taken just 1 month ago. The woman in the photograph was Jennifer Walsh, a 24-year-old junior account executive from the company's Philadelphia office. She had started at Pinnacle 6 months earlier, fresh out of college, eager to prove herself in the corporate world. Just like Sarah had been. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos as she stood up from her corner seat, her laptop still in her hands, controlling the presentation that had just destroyed Marcus's life. This pattern of predatory behavior, financial fraud, and identity deception has been going on for years, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I have documentation of at least 6 other women Marcus has harassed, 3 of whom were paid settlements to keep quiet. I have evidence of systematic theft totaling over $500,000. And I have proof that this company's leadership has been willfully ignorant of behavior that should have ended Marcus's career years ago. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't shock, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of people realizing they were about to be held accountable for their complicity in Marcus's crimes. Patricia Williamson stood up slowly, her face pale but determined. "Security, please escort Mr. Kellerman from the building immediately. Do not allow him to return to his office or access any company property. Legal team, I need you to begin immediate proceedings for criminal prosecution and civil recovery of stolen funds. HR, I want a full investigation of how this was allowed to continue for so long without proper oversight." Marcus was led away by security guards, his career at Pinnacle over, his reputation destroyed, his crimes exposed. As he passed Sarah's chair, he looked at her with a mixture of hatred and something that might have been respect. He finally understood that he had chosen the wrong victim this time. But the meeting wasn't over. Patricia Williamson turned to address the room, but particularly Sarah. "Ms. Chen, I owe you an apology. This company failed you in ways that are inexcusable. We allowed a predator to operate under our roof while hiding behind a facade of professionalism. Your courage in exposing this corruption likely saved other women from becoming victims, and saved this company from even greater financial losses." Sarah nodded, accepting the apology but knowing it didn't erase the months of trauma she had endured. However, what happened next would change everything once again. Patricia continued, "Effective immediately, you're being promoted to Vice President of Marketing, with a salary increase to match your new responsibilities. Additionally, the company will be implementing new policies and oversight procedures to ensure this never happens again. You'll be heading up that initiative." The promotion was everything Sarah had ever wanted professionally, but it came with a price she hadn't anticipated. As the meeting dispersed and people began approaching her with congratulations and support, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness rather than triumph. Over the following weeks, the fallout from that February morning continued to reverberate through the company and beyond. Marcus was arrested at his home, charged with embezzlement, fraud, and sexual harassment. The local news picked up the story, and Sarah found herself thrust into the spotlight as a whistleblower and advocate for workplace safety. Jennifer Walsh, the young woman from the Philadelphia office, came forward with her own story of harassment and intimidation. Two other former employees broke their NDAs to share their experiences with Marcus, despite the legal risks. The scandal grew larger, more complex, reaching into the highest levels of corporate culture and accountability. But as Sarah settled into her new role as vice president, something unexpected happened. The power that had been used to victimize her was now hers to wield, and she discovered that the line between justice and revenge was thinner than she had ever imagined. Sarah began implementing changes throughout the company with an intensity that surprised even her supporters. She restructured reporting hierarchies, instituted mandatory harassment training, and created anonymous reporting systems. But she also began targeting employees she suspected of enabling Marcus's behavior, reassigning them to less desirable positions, cutting their bonuses, making their work lives increasingly difficult. The HR director who had failed to investigate previous complaints found herself under scrutiny for every decision she made. The department heads who had laughed at Marcus's inappropriate jokes at company social events were suddenly excluded from important meetings and strategic discussions. Sarah was methodically dismantling the network of people who had allowed Marcus's crimes to continue unchecked. Some employees praised Sarah's reforms as necessary and overdue. Others began to whisper that she had gone too far, that her pursuit of justice had become a vendetta against anyone who had ever supported Marcus. The line between accountability and revenge became increasingly blurred as Sarah wielded her new power with the precision of someone who had learned firsthand how devastating unchecked authority could be. 6 months after the infamous quarterly meeting, Sarah received a phone call that would force her to confront the true cost of her revenge. Marcus Kellerman had been found dead in his prison cell, apparently by suicide. He had left behind a note apologizing to his family and acknowledging his crimes, but also containing a message specifically for Sarah. The note read, "You were right to expose me. I was a monster who destroyed lives and careers. But be careful that in your pursuit of justice, you don't become the very thing you set out to destroy. Power corrupts everyone, Sarah. Even the victims." Sarah stared at the note for hours, Marcus's final words echoing in her mind. She thought about the employees she had systematically pushed out of the company, the people whose careers she had damaged in her quest to reform the corporate culture. She realized that she had been using her position to settle scores, to punish not just actual wrongdoers but anyone who had failed to see what she had seen, failed to act when she needed them to act. In seeking justice for herself and other victims, had she become another kind of predator? Had she used her power to intimidate and destroy, just as Marcus had done to her? The revelation forced Sarah to confront an uncomfortable truth about revenge, that it rarely stops where we intend it to. The appetite for justice can grow into a hunger for power, and power inevitably corrupts even those who seek it for the right reasons. Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She resigned from her position as vice president, effective immediately. In her resignation letter to the company, she wrote, "I exposed Marcus Kellerman's crimes because I believed in justice and protecting future victims. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of the difference between justice and revenge. I became someone I don't recognize, someone who used power to intimidate and control others. This company needs leaders who can reform without becoming tyrants, who can seek justice without losing their humanity." If you want more shocking stories like this that challenge everything you think you know about justice and revenge, subscribe now and join the journey into the darkest corners of human nature. Sarah's resignation sent shockwaves through Pinnacle Digital Solutions and the broader business community that had been watching the fallout from Marcus's exposure. Many saw her resignation as the act of someone with integrity, someone willing to step away from power when she realized she was misusing it. Others viewed it as weakness, a failure to see her mission through to completion. But Sarah's story doesn't end with her resignation. It ends with what she did next, and the final revelation that would reframe everything that had happened in that conference room on February 28. 3 months after leaving Pinnacle, Sarah started her own consulting firm specializing in corporate compliance and workplace safety. She used her experience, both as a victim and as someone who had wielded power inappropriately, to help other companies identify and eliminate toxic behaviors before they could take root. Her first client was a small tech startup whose female employees had been complaining about inappropriate behavior from a senior developer. Sarah's investigation uncovered a pattern of harassment remarkably similar to what she had experienced with Marcus. But instead of building toward a dramatic public revelation, Sarah chose a different approach. She worked quietly with the company's leadership to document the behavior, build a case for termination, and provide counseling and support for the victims. The harasser was fired, the victims were given the resources they needed to heal, and the company implemented policies to prevent future incidents. No public shaming, no viral revenge story, no devastating presentation that would haunt the perpetrator for the rest of his life. Just justice, quiet and effective and focused on healing rather than destruction. This became Sarah's new model for addressing workplace harassment and abuse. She realized that the theatrical revenge she had orchestrated against Marcus, while satisfying in the moment, had ultimately created more trauma for everyone involved, including herself. True justice wasn't about destruction, it was about protection, prevention, and healing. But there was one final twist to Sarah's story, one last revelation that would cast everything that happened in that conference room in a different light. 2 years after Marcus's death, Sarah received a package with no return address. Inside was a thumb drive containing video files and a handwritten note. "I thought you should know the truth about what really happened. You deserved better than to carry this guilt. A friend." The videos on the thumb drive were security footage from Pinnacle's offices, footage that had been deleted from the official records but preserved by someone with access to the system. The videos showed Marcus in his office after hours, not harassing employees, but meeting with men in expensive suits who weren't company personnel. The meetings were clearly business transactions, but not legitimate ones. Money was changing hands, documents were being exchanged, and Marcus appeared to be under extreme stress during these encounters. In one video, Marcus was visibly shaking as he handed over what appeared to be client files to the mysterious visitors. Sarah realized that Marcus hadn't just been a sexual predator and embezzler. He had been involved with organized crime, selling corporate secrets and client information to competitors or worse. The harassment of female employees, the financial fraud, these weren't just the actions of a corrupt executive. They were the desperate acts of a man who was being blackmailed and extorted by dangerous people. The final video was the most shocking of all. It showed Marcus in his office the night before the quarterly meeting, frantically trying to delete files from his computer while talking on the phone. The audio was clear enough to make out his words, "I can't do this anymore. I'm going to confess everything at the meeting tomorrow. Sarah Chen is going to expose me anyway, so I might as well come clean about all of it. Tell your boss I'm done." Marcus had been planning to confess his crimes at that quarterly meeting. Sarah's presentation had simply beaten him to it. But more importantly, his confession would have implicated the criminal organization he had been working with, putting him in even greater danger than public humiliation and legal prosecution. Sarah stared at the screen as the implications sank in. Marcus's death in prison hadn't been suicide. It had been murder, orchestrated by the people he had been planning to expose. Her revenge had inadvertently protected him from having to make that confession, but it had also sealed his fate by making him a liability to his criminal associates. The final twist was that Marcus's last message to her, the warning about power and corruption, hadn't been the words of a defeated predator. It had been the final act of a man who had lost control of his life years earlier, who had been trapped in a web of criminality and blackmail that had driven him to increasingly desperate acts. This revelation didn't excuse Marcus's harassment of Sarah and other women. It didn't erase the trauma he had caused or the lives he had damaged. But it added a layer of complexity to his story that Sarah hadn't anticipated, a reminder that even the most seemingly clear-cut cases of good versus evil often contain hidden depths of moral ambiguity. Sarah never revealed this information publicly. She quietly provided the evidence to law enforcement, who used it to investigate and eventually prosecute the criminal organization Marcus had been involved with. But she kept the truth about Marcus's final months to herself, understanding that some revelations create more pain than healing. In the end, Sarah's revenge had been perfect in ways she never intended and terrible in ways she never anticipated. She had exposed a predator, saved future victims, and advanced her own career. But she had also inadvertently caused a man's death, learned the corrupting nature of power firsthand, and discovered that the truth is always more complicated than the story we tell ourselves. Years later, when people asked Sarah about her experience at Pinnacle Digital Solutions, she would tell them that revenge is a luxury that victims can rarely afford. The satisfaction of destroying your tormentor is real but fleeting, while the consequences of wielding that kind of power can haunt you forever. The real victory, she learned, wasn't in the dramatic presentation that destroyed Marcus Kellerman's life. It was in the quiet work she did afterward, helping other victims find justice without losing their humanity in the process. It was in choosing healing over hatred, protection over punishment, prevention over revenge. But late at night, when Sarah was alone with her thoughts, she would sometimes remember the look on Marcus's face as his crimes were revealed to everyone he had tried to impress. She would remember the power she had felt in that moment, the intoxicating rush of complete control over someone who had made her feel powerless. And she would wonder if, given the chance to do it all again, she would make the same choices. Because the truth about revenge isn't that it's wrong or right, effective or ineffective. The truth about revenge is that once you taste that kind of power, once you see your enemy completely destroyed by your hand, it changes you in ways you can never fully undo. Sarah Chen got her revenge. But in the end, she learned that the most important question isn't whether you can destroy your enemies. It's whether you can live with who you become in the process. The conference room at Pinnacle Digital Solutions was renovated 6 months after that infamous February meeting. They removed the mahogany table where Marcus had stood as his life imploded, replaced the projection screen that had displayed his crimes, changed the very layout of the space to erase any trace of what had happened there. But the people who were in that room still carry the memory of that morning when justice and revenge collided in the most spectacular way possible. They remember the moment when the hunter became the hunted, when the predator became the prey, when a young woman with nothing left to lose showed them all what real power looks like. Sarah's story is a reminder that in a world where the powerful prey on the vulnerable, sometimes the only justice comes from the victims themselves. But it's also a warning that the line between justice and vengeance is razor-thin, and crossing it can cost you more than you ever imagined. So the next time someone betrays your trust, abuses their power over you, or tries to destroy your life for their own gratification, ask yourself this question: is your revenge worth becoming the very thing you're fighting against? Because in the end, we all become monsters in someone else's story. The only choice we have is what kind of monster we become. If you want more stories that will challenge everything you think you know about justice, power, and human nature, subscribe now. Because the truth about revenge isn't found in the moment of victory, it's found in what happens after, when you have to live with the choices you made and the person you became. Some battles are won at too high a price. Some victories hollow out your soul. And sometimes, the greatest act of strength isn't destroying your enemy, it's choosing not to become them. Sarah Chen learned all of this the hard way. The question is, what will you do with the lesson?